Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very important day. Today, the 4th of July. Yes, 4th of July, very significant day, not here, but in the other part of the world. Well, today is 16 degrees and mostly cloudy, and in the city at the moment, there's a slight drizzle, as was all morning today, on and off. There has been some light rain and light showers. I won't say heavy rain. Well, let's get the show on the road, and with that, let's take a look at the news in brief, courtesy of ABC.
New South Wales Police have set up a crime scene this morning after skeletal remains were found in the back of a burnt-out car in the Royal National Park in Sydney South. Fire crews were called to the Waterfall Flat car park about midnight to extinguish a fire in a small SUV. They then found the skeleton inside. The remains will be sent for forensic testing and identification. The Reserve Bank Board is meeting again today to decide whether to hike interest rates for the 13th time in just over a year. Economists are split on whether another rise is likely, amid mixed signals on the impact of rises so far. Latest inflation figures released last week showed a sharp decline, but house price data out yesterday showed the market is recovering. Energy, security and trade talks will be on the agenda as the Indonesian President Joko Widodo begins his 3-day visit to Australia. The President flew into Sydney last night and is set to attend official meetings with the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and business leaders. The pair is also expected to discuss visa rules for Indonesians who want to travel to Australia. The full extent of the consequences facing consulting firm PwC Australia is still unclear after 8 senior partners were named and sacked over the tax leak scandal. They include former Chief Executive Tom Seymour and former Chief Risk Officer Sean Gregory. The matter has also been referred to the new National Anti-Corruption Commission, which began work yesterday.
Hope to see that the interest rate doesn't happen today, but it will be something to catch up. We'll report on that tomorrow. No doubt it will be all over the social media and everything like that, but we'll bring our own reflection on the event and see where we are with that as well. Right, Australian graduates are owing around $1 billion to the HECS debt. Where are we headed to?
Anthony Junot began his overseas adventure back in 2017. That was also the first year graduates had to make HECS repayments no matter where they were living or earning. The comedian stopped reporting his income to the ATO.
I was rudely surprised that what I owed in the time that I hadn't reported was 10,000 Australian dollars.
The law change was as much about fairness as it was about money.
There was a perception that it was unfair that people in Australia had to pay, but people going overseas did not.
There are more than 40,000 graduates living overseas with a HECS debt. On average, they each owe about $1,000 more than graduates overall. But there are gaps in the data, like just how many left Australia before the changes 7 years ago. So what's to stop expats never paying back their HECS debt?
Probably not going to be worth the ATO's while to do it. But it does mean that people have to be very conscious that, if they do not repay overseas when they should have, they could get a very large bill when they return to Australia.
The first in his family to go to university, Anthony's parents told him a degree would guarantee a decent salary. After paying another $18,000 to clear his debt, he says students should think carefully about the cost of studying.
If you had told me at the start that this loan actually works out to, or could work out to this much, maybe I would have, maybe I wouldn't have gone into the first degree I could think of at 18, and I would have thought long and hard about what degree I wanted to and what the value of that is.
Jessica Black, ABC.
And that is the harsh reality that, you want an education, you have to pay for it. And it is not fair that people living in Australia have to repay the debts and people who have gone overseas don't. But how can ATO administer that? So that's very, very hard. Well, there are fears that, childcare subsidies will be eaten up in the fees that's high. So this is what we've been talking about. We'll talk about, the increasing the interest rate, that results in increasing other items, and there's wages rise and everything. So this cycle doesn't stop. When there is a wage rise, there is cost of living that's gone up as well. Mortgage repayments have gone up. So where can people be better off? So the child care, the rebates that will be there will be eaten up in the fees that they have been increased.
Families should notice it from next Monday when they normally get a rebate from the government that covers their childcare costs. This was a policy Labor took to the last election, and it was one of the only real differences with the coalition. And they pledged basically to increase the subsidy for everyone but the very wealthiest Australians. So at the bottom end, if you have a combined income of $80,000, your subsidy will go up from 85% to 90%, and then tapers away as you earn more. But it has increased to families earning up to $530,000. The subsidy used to cut out at $350,000. So essentially most families should see some money back if inflation or fee increases from their childcare operator doesn't get there first.
And so why are there calls for some broader changes?
Yeah, so the Australian government's spending a huge amount of money on childcare, Karina, now. It's going to be almost $13 billion in the next financial year. That's a massive spend, and basically people have said that the system just hasn't kept pace with changes. One example is that the way Centrelink bills families is on an hourly rate, even though most daycare centres charge parents for a flat daily fee. So if your centre's open for longer, you might get more money back from the government, even though you're on the same income as someone else. So that's just one of many areas of change. And there are a couple of pretty wide-ranging reviews due to come out in the next year. So I think we will see a lot of action in this space.
Really hope to see some action in that area. Well, we're talking about action. One area where there was no action. There was a committee which got paid lots of money, but they never actually met in the last 2 years.
Parliament's Legislation Committee can't directly change laws, but it has changed minds.
I have taken the evidence that's been provided to the committee and assessed it, and on my assessment and on the committee's assessment, the legislation shouldn't proceed.
After Labor, then in opposition, sent stop and search powers to the Standing Committee on Legislation in 2010, the Nationals effectively put an end to the Liberals' plans. Now the roles are reversed, and that same committee is lying dormant. Parliament hasn't given it anything to do since 2020. But Dr Brian Walker and Labor's Kate Doust are collecting tens of thousands of dollars just for being members.
I'm very comfortable receiving $21,000, not a problem at all. What I'm not comfortable with is the fact that our expertise is not being made use of.
Ms Doust says she's been keen to participate as a committee member, and only the government can explain why it hasn't been used. Shelley Payne is a member of another active standing committee, so would have been paid anyway. So too are Labor's Sally Talbot and the Liberals' Steve Martin, but they pocketed higher salaries as chair and deputy chair of the inactive Legislation Committee. The committee exists to investigate complex laws and to report back to Parliament with recommendations. But the opposition says Labor's been using its majority to see legislation sail through Parliament without proper scrutiny.
Where you don't allow that type of scrutiny on very, very complex pieces of legislation, you're going to have issues develop down the track.
We make no apologies for the fact that our legislative agenda is ambitious and we want to see laws passed as quickly as possible.
The Premier accused the opposition of historically overusing the committee to delay legislation, such as during the debate over same-sex surrogacy laws.
Every day. Order.
The Premier and committee's chair say it sits ready to be called upon. Whether the government intends to use it is a different story. James Carmody, ABC News.
So there you go, a committee which gets paid a lot of money without any actual use to the taxpayers. Murray River, what's happening with the cleaning up? But in the summer there has been a lot of floods. So is the cleaning up helping at all?
It's been months since floodwaters in Blanchetown subsided, but the laborious clean-up is continuing.
The first time that I came down here, once the floods had subsided, it looked like Gotham City. It was just dreary. You walked in and just had this sense of almost like you wanted to faint. It was just, wow. You couldn't believe it. There was not a bit of greenery around the place.
It's a dirty job, but superheroes have turned up in the form of a small army of volunteers.
Really, it's about wanting to do something for other people, do something for the community, and this is a really practical way that we can do that we can come when people really need help.
Volunteers have been clearing piles of debris. Even with this support, the cleanup is expected to continue for months.
A lot of people think now that the floods are gone, everything's back to normal. A lot of these people are probably, between 12 months and 4 years away from actually getting back to utilising the property.
For some owners, the work needed has been too daunting, with some deciding to sell up rather than rebuild.
Some of our neighbours are saying, look, I'm just not enjoying being up there. I don't want to be up there. Once the insurance company sorts it out, then we'll come up. And the lady next door to us, she came up, I think, for the second time last weekend.
One of the things that comes up often is the memories that they have lost. So it's not just about the physical things in their house that's been damaged, but they've lost the space where they had family dinners, or where their kids used to play, or whatever it might be.
Work is now underway to rebuild those memories. Sophie Holder, ABC News, Blanchetown.
So there you go, another reality that if you live on the riverbank, which is prone to flood, so you need to be a little bit prepared. But I mean, when you have lived there for a long time, you do have a lifetime of memories and many precious things that you hold dear to you, and they will be gone and gone forever. Physical things can be replaced. They can never be replaced. That is very, very, very really sad. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now let's move on and we'll take a look at why are energy prices soaring and keep going up.
Your power bills are about to get even more expensive. Regulators have approved increases again. They'll vary depending on where you live and which electricity provider you're with. For consumers and even the most seasoned energy observers, it'll be a shock to the system.
Certainly since the regulated prices were reintroduced in 2019, these are the biggest increases that we've seen.
In some states, the price hikes will add hundreds of dollars to the annual electricity bill. Some households in regional Queensland can expect a hike of up to 28.7%, while customers in South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria could cop price rises as high as between 23 and 25%. Meanwhile, in smaller and more regulated markets, price hikes won't be as steep. Tasmanians will see a 9.5% rise. In WA, it'll be just 2.5%. So why are prices rising so much? Well, regulators calculate the increases based on how much it costs retailers to provide us with electricity. They say that's become much more expensive because of high inflation and covers things like staff wages and marketing, energy efficiency schemes, and big costs like poles and wires and wholesale energy prices.
The way electricity is supplied varies dramatically across the country. In some cases it's a lot of coal and gas and wind and solar. In some cases it's all more hydro. And that has a big impact on price increases, and so that's why they vary a lot. We also have cases where the government is the only supplier.
And the most significant factor is we're still paying for last year's energy crisis, which was caused by local coal-fired power station outages, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which sent global energy prices soaring. The peak body for energy retailers says those costs must be recovered.
The majority of the issues that occurred in the wholesale market last year were in the first half of this financial year, so between June and October. Retailers largely protected customers from those price increases that occurred in the wholesale price. We're starting to see those filter through into contracts now.
The price increases apply to what's known as default offers. They act as a benchmark for electricity prices nationally. Customers are typically put on these contracts when they don't ask for a better offer.
It's really important that the regulator sets that price at a rate that enables retailers to recover their costs. That allows retailers to offer those other market offers to other customers.
Some are questioning why regulators have approved such steep increases when some retailers have upgraded their profit forecasts.
They're not saying in their numbers that they see prices going down very much. Now, that will be a bit of a tussle between them and the regulator, I am sure.
In states with multiple retailers, you might be able to get a better deal, but experts say that's getting tougher. Retailers can also charge more for electricity used at different times of the day. The cost of gas has also gone up, with bills in some states increasing by as much as 30%. That's important because gas is known as a price setter in the electricity market.
And gas as power generation is used when there's not enough coal, the wind isn't blowing, sun isn't shining. So as a consequence of that, when gas is called upon, it is an expensive source of electricity, and that tends to push up the prices.
Regulators say energy bills would have been even higher if the federal government hadn't capped wholesale coal and gas prices at the end of last year. Cold comfort for those struggling to afford to keep the heater on this winter.
Keeping the heat on, and that is a big question. As we know, at this point in time, we're going through the coldest season of the year. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now, let's move on and look at why opposition says rate rises not enough done on inflation.
There's no doubt, Michael, there's enormous pain being felt by so many Australians from these interest rate increases and the inflationary pressures that they're facing. Those pain pressures are very, very real, and they're getting more real by the day. The truth of the matter is that we shouldn't be relying on the Reserve Bank to do all the work to take pressure off inflation. We need to have every lever of government being pulled to take pressure off inflation. That's not what we're seeing, and that'll take pressure off the Reserve Bank, and it'll mean they won't have to push through interest rate increases and cause even further pain than what we've already seen.
But hasn't the government been doing just that, banking most of the revenue increase, in many cases the unexpected revenue increase, and putting that towards paying down the debt and winding back what has been a pretty big deficit?
Well, that's their propaganda, Michael, but let's look at the facts. They're spending $185 billion more than when they came into government. That's over $7,000 extra spending for every man, woman and child in this country. Now, the problem with that is that's fuel on the fire for inflation. That's adding to inflation. It's making the situation worse. It's putting the foot on the accelerator at exactly the time when the Reserve Bank is putting the foot on the brake. And if you have the foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time, it wrecks the engine. Now, that's the situation we have. They're pursuing energy policies and industrial relations policies that are making the situation worse. We need a government that is pulling every lever it can, making an absolute priority of fighting inflation.
You mentioned
that will take pressure off the Reserve Bank.
Well, you mentioned that spending. OK, you're unhappy with that. What would you cut? Would it be the energy relief payments? Would it be the higher childcare subsidies? What would you take out of the equation?
Well, we've opposed $45 billion of additional spending in recent months in the Parliament, and we've done that because we feel this is the wrong time to be spending that kind of money. We've got to take pressure off inflation. We've got to take pressure off all Australians. The beauty of taking pressure off inflation is it helps absolutely everybody, right through our entire economy, from small businesses to hard-working families with a mortgage to those who are on welfare. You name it, everyone benefits from it, Michael, and that's why this has to be the first, second and third priority of the government.
We had the Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones on the show roughly this time yesterday, where he confirmed to us that the final surplus for this financial year will come in at either at $20 billion or above. What do you reckon the government should do with that?
Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is they need to control their spending to take pressure off inflation. Now, the $185 billion, over $7,000 for every man, woman and child in this country of extra spending since they came into government, that is fueling inflation. So we need to see a government that is taking the windfall. It's very clear there's been a big windfall from commodity prices, from strong labour markets, to take pressure off inflation. And that helps absolutely everyone. This is the point. This is one of those unusual situations where you have a government policy that can be pursued, delivering on their energy promises they made before the election, making sure our industrial relations environment fights inflation, making sure that fiscal policy spending is fighting inflation first. We all benefit from that. This is a chance to unite Australians with a policy that's good for all of us, and most of all, it takes pressure off the Reserve Bank. We'll see how that pressure plays out today.
Yeah, we heard many Australians suffering there before we came on. Is there any scope, in your view, for further cost of living relief?
Well, the best cost of living relief is lower inflation, Michael. That's my point. That is far and away the best cost of living relief, and government can play a role. You know, this idea that inflation comes from the Kremlin, it's wrong. Inflation comes from Canberra. Canberra has a role to play in taking pressure off inflation. The job shouldn't be left to the Reserve Bank. We need to see a government that's treating this as its first, second and third priority. All ministers should be on board to fight this. It's got to be the top priority.
Do you believe the Reserve Bank Governor, Phil Lowe, deserves an extension to his term?
I'm not going to get into that, Michael. That's a matter for the government. What I do know is whoever's in that seat, that person needs government policy that's taking pressure off the Reserve Bank, that's making it easier for them to do their job, which means they don't have to put up interest rates, and that makes life better for all Australians. That's what we need to see.
And that is exactly what we need to see. And did you notice Michael's dressing up today? Pretty similar to mine. Well, it's just by coincidence. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to look at some of the functions and events. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. And hope you have a wonderful rest of Tuesday. And hopefully they don't rise that interest rate later today when the Reserve Bank meets. Until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us. It's been wonderful having your company.